Chapters 10 and 11 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10, wherein is related the crafty device Sancho adopted to enchant the lady Dulcinea, and other incidents as ludicrous as they are true. When the author of this great history comes to relate what is set down in this chapter, he says he would have preferred to pass it over in silence, fearing it would not be believed, because here Don Quixote's madness reaches the confines of the greatest that can be conceived, and even goes a couple of bowshots beyond the greatest. But, after all, though still under the same fear and apprehension, he has recorded it without adding to the story or leaving out a particle of the truth, and entirely disregarding the charges of falsehood that might be brought against him. And he was right, for the truth may run fine, but will not break, and always rises above falsehood as oil above water, and so, going on with his story, he says that as soon as Don Quixote ensconced himself in the forest, oak grove, or wood, near El Toboso, he bade Sancho return to the city, and not come into his presence again without having first spoken on his behalf to his lady, and begged of her that it might be her good pleasure to permit herself to be seen by her enslaved knight, and deign to bestow her blessing upon him, so that he might thereby hope for a happy issue in all his encounters and difficult enterprises. Sancho undertook to execute the task according to the instructions, and to bring back an answer as good as the one he brought back before. "Go, my son," said Don Quixote, "and be not dazed when thou findest thyself exposed to the light of that sun of beauty thou art going to see. Happy thou above all the squires in the world. Bear in mind, and let it not escape thy memory, how she receives thee. If she changes colour while thou art giving her my message, if she is agitated and disturbed at hearing my name, if she cannot rest upon her cushion, shouldst thou happily find her seated in the sumptuous state chamber proper to her rank, and should she be standing, observe if she poises herself now on one foot, now on the other, if she repeats 2 or 3 times the reply she gives thee, if she passes from gentleness to austerity, from asperity to tenderness, if she raises her hand to smooth her hair though it not be disarranged. In short, my son, observe all her actions and motions, for if thou wilt report them to me as they were, I will gather what she hides in the recesses of her heart as regards my love. For I would have thee know, Sancho, if thou knowest it not, that with lovers the outward actions and motions they give way to when their loves are in question are the faithful messengers that carry the news of what is going on in the depths of their hearts. Go, my friend, may better fortune than mine attend thee, and bring thee a happier issue than that which I await in dread in this dreary solitude." "I will go, and return quickly," said Sancho. "Cheer up that little heart of yours, master mine, for at the present moment you seem to have got one no bigger than a hazelnut. Remember what they say, that a stout heart breaks bad luck, and that where there are no fletches there are no pegs. And moreover they say, the hare jumps up where it's not looked for. I say this because, if we could not find my lady's palaces or castles tonight, now that it is daylight, I count upon finding them when I least expect it, and once found, leave it to me to manage her." "Verily, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "thou dost always bring in thy proverbs happily, whatever we deal with. May God give me better luck in what I am anxious about." With this Sancho wheeled about and gave Dapple the stick, and Don Quixote remained behind, seated on his horse, resting in his stirrups, and leaning on the end of his lance, filled with sad and troubled forebodings, and there we will leave him, and accompany Sancho, who went off no less serious and troubled than he left his master, so much so that as soon as he had got out of the thicket, and looking round saw that Don Quixote was not within sight, he dismounted from his ass, and seating himself at the foot of a tree, began to commune with himself, saying, "Now, brother Sancho, let us know where your worship is going. Are you going to look for some ass that has been lost? Not at all. Then what are you going to look for? I am going to look for a princess, that's all, and in her for the Son of Beauty and the whole heaven at once. And where do you expect to find all this, Sancho? Where? Why, in the great city of El Toboso. Well, and for whom are you going to look for her? For the famous knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, who rights wrongs, gives food to those who thirst, and drink to the hungry. That's all very well, but do you know her house, Sancho? My master says it will be some royal palace or grand castle. And have you ever seen her by any chance? Neither I nor my master ever saw her. And does it strike you that it would be just and right if the El Toboso people, finding out that you were here with the intention of going to tamper with their princesses and trouble their ladies, were to come and cudgel your ribs, and not leave a whole bone in you? They would, indeed, have very good reason, if they did not see that I am under orders, and that you are a messenger, my friend. No blame belongs to you. Don't you trust to that, Sancho, for the Manchegan folk are as hot-tempered as they are honest, and don't put up with liberties from anybody. By the Lord, if they get scent of you, it will be worse for you, I promise you. Be off, you scoundrel. Let the bolt fall. Why should I go looking for 3 feet on a cat to please another man? And what is more, when looking for Dulcinea, we'll be looking for Marica in Ravina, or the bachelor in Salamanca. The devil, and nobody else has mixed me up in all this business." Such was the soliloquy Sancho held with himself, and all the conclusion he could come to was to say to himself again, "Well, there's remedy for everything except death, under whose yoke we have all to pass, whether we like it or not, when life's finished. I have seen by 1,000 signs that this master of mine is a madman fit to be tied, and for that matter I too am not behind him, for I'm a greater fool than he is when I follow him and serve him. If there's any truth in the proverb that says, 'Tell me what company thou keepest, and I'll tell thee what thou art,' or in that other, 'Not with whom thou art bred, but with whom thou art fed.' Well then, if he be mad, as he is, and with a madness that mostly takes one thing for another, and white for black, and black for white, as was seen when he said the windmills were giants, and the monks' mules dromedaries, flocks of sheep armies of enemies, and much more to the same tune, it will not be very hard to make him believe that some country girl, the first I come across here, is the lady Dulcinea, and if he does not believe it, I'll swear it, and if he should swear, I'll swear again, and if he persists, I'll persist still more, so as, come what may, to have my quoit always over the peg. Maybe by holding out this way, I may put a stop to his sending me on messages of this kind another time, or maybe he will think, as I suspect he will, that one of those wicked enchanters, who he says have a spite against him, has changed her form for the sake of doing him an ill turn and injuring him." With this reflection Sancho made his mind easy, counting the business as good as settled, and stayed there till the afternoon so as to make Don Quixote think he had time enough to go to El Toboso and return, and things turned out so luckily for him that as he got up to Mount Dapple he spied, coming from El Toboso towards the spot where he stood, 3 peasant girls on 3 colts or fillies, for the author does not make the point clear, though it is more likely they were she-asses, the usual mount with village girls, but as it is of no great consequence, we need not stop to prove it. To be brief, the instant Sancho saw the peasant girls, he returned full speed to seek his master, and found him sighing and uttering 1,000 passionate lamentations. When Don Quixote saw him, he exclaimed, "What news, Sancho, my friend?
Am I to mark this day with a white stone or a black?" "Your worship," replied Sancho, "had better mark it with ruddle, like the inscriptions on the walls of classrooms, and those who see it may see it plain." "Then thou bringest good news," said Don Quixote.
"So good," replied Sancho, "that your worship is only to spur Rocinante, and get out into the open field to see the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, who, with 2 others, damsels of hers, is coming to see your worship." "Holy God, what art thou saying, Sancho, my friend?" exclaimed Don Quixote. "Take care thou art not deceiving me, or seeking by false joy to cheer my real sadness." "What can I get by deceiving your worship?" returned Sancho, "especially when it will so soon be shown whether I tell the truth or not. Come, señor, push on, and you will see the princess our mistress coming, robed and adorned, in fact, like what she is. Her damsels and she are all one glow of gold, all bunches of pearls, all diamonds, all rubies, all cloth of brocade of more than 10 borders, with their hair loose on their shoulders like so many sunbeams playing with the wind, and moreover they come mounted on 3 piebald hackneys, the finest sight you ever saw."
"Hackneys, you mean, Sancho?" said Don Quixote.
"There is not much difference between cackneys and hackneys," said Sancho, "but no matter what they come on, there they are, the finest ladies one could wish for, especially my lady the Princess Dulcinea, who staggers one's senses."
"Let us go, Sancho, my son," said Don Quixote, "and in guerdon of this news as unexpected as it is good, I bestow upon thee the best spoil I shall win in the first adventure I may have, or if that does not satisfy thee,
I promise thee the
foals I shall have this year from my 3 mares that thou knowest are in foal on our village common."
"I'll take the foals," said Sancho, "for it is not quite certain that the spoils of the first adventure will be good ones."
By this time they had cleared the wood, and saw the 3 village lasses close at hand. Don Quixote looked all along the road to El Toboso, and as he could see nobody except the 3 peasant girls, he was completely puzzled, and asked Sancho if it was outside the city he had left them.
"How outside the city?" returned Sancho. "Are your worship's eyes in the back of your head, that you can't see that they are these who are coming here, shining like the very sun at noonday?"
"I see nothing, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "but 3 country girls on 3 jackasses."
"Now may God deliver me from the devil," said Sancho. "And can it be that your worship takes 3 hackneys, or whatever they're called, as white as the driven snow, for jackasses? By the Lord, I could tear my beard if that was the case."
"Well, I can only say, Sancho, my friend," said Don Quixote, "that it is as plain as they are jackasses, or jennyasses, as that I am Don Quixote and thou Sancho Panza. At any rate, they seem to me to be so."
"Hush, señor," said Sancho, "don't talk that way, but open your eyes, and come and pay your respects to the lady of your thoughts, who is close upon us now."
And with these words he advanced to receive the 3 village lasses, and dismounting from Dapple, caught hold of one of the asses of the 3 country girls by the halter, and dropping on both knees on the ground, he said,
"Queen and princess and duchess of beauty, may it please your haughtiness and greatness to receive into your favour and good will your captive knight, who stands there turned into marble stone and quite stupefied and benumbed at finding himself in your magnificent presence. I am Sancho Panza, his squire, and he the vagabond knight Don Quixote of La Mancha, otherwise called the Knight of the Rueful Countenance."
Don Quixote had by this time placed himself on his knees beside Sancho, and, with eyes starting out of his head and a puzzled gaze, was regarding her whom Sancho called queen and lady, and, as he could see nothing in her except a village lass, and not a very well-favoured one, for she was platter-faced and snub-nosed, he was perplexed and bewildered, and did not venture to open his lips. The country girls at the same time were astonished to see these two men, so different in appearance, on their knees, preventing their companion from going on. She, however, who had been stopped, breaking silence, said angrily and testily,
"Get out of the way! Bad luck to you, and let us pass, for we are in a hurry."
To which Sancho returned, "O princess and universal lady of El Toboso, is not your magnanimous heart softened by seeing the pillar and prop of knight-errantry on his knees before your sublimated presence?"
On hearing this, one of the others exclaimed,
"Woe then! Why, I'm rubbing thee down, she-ass of my father-in-law! See how the lordlings come to make game of the village girls now, as if we here could not chaff as well as themselves! Go your own way, and let us go ours, and it will be better for you."
"Get up, Sancho," said Don Quixote at this. "I see that fortune, with evil done to me unsated still, has taken possession of all the roads by which any comfort may reach this wretched soul that I carry in my flesh. And thou, highest perfection of excellence that can be desired, utmost limit of grace in human shape, sole relief of this afflicted heart that adores thee, though the malign enchanter that persecutes me has brought clouds and cataracts on my eyes, and to them and them only transformed thy unparagoned beauty, and changed thy features into those of a poor peasant girl, if so be he has not at the same time changed mine into those of some monster to render them loathsome in thy sight, refuse not to look upon me with tenderness and love, seeing in this submission that I make on my knees to thy transformed beauty the humility with which my soul adores thee."
"Heyday, my grandfather!" cried the girl. "Much I care for your love-making. Get out of the way and let us pass, and we'll thank you."
Sancho stood aside and let her go, very well pleased to have got so well out of the hobble he was in. The instant the village lass who had done duty for Dulcinea found herself free, prodding her hackney with a spike she had at the end of a stick, she set off at full speed across the field. The she-ass, however, feeling the point more acutely than usual, began cutting such capers that it flung the lady Dulcinea to the ground, seeing which Don Quixote ran to raise her up, and Sancho to fix and girth the pack-saddle, which also had slipped under the ass's belly. The pack-saddle being secured, as Don Quixote was about to lift up his enchanted mistress in his arms and put her upon her beast, the lady, getting up from the ground, saved him the trouble, for, going back a little, she took a short run, and, putting both hands on the croup of the ass, she dropped into the saddle more lightly than a falcon, and sat astride like a man, whereat Sancho said,
"Rogue! But our lady is lighter than a lanner, and might teach the cleverest Cordovan or Mexican how to mount. She cleared the back of the saddle in one jump, and without spurs she is making the hackney go like a zebra, and her damsels are no way behind her, for they all fly like the wind." Which was the truth, for as soon as they saw Dulcinea mounted, they pushed on after her, and sped away without looking back, for more than half a league. Don Quixote followed them with his eyes, and when they were no longer in sight, he turned to Sancho and said, "How now, Sancho? Thou seest how I am hated by enchanters, and see to what a length the malice and spite they bear me go, when they seek to deprive me of the happiness it would give me to see my lady in her own proper form. The fact is, I was born to be an example of misfortune, and the target and mark at which the arrows of adversity are aimed and directed. Observe, too, Sancho, that these traitors were not content with changing and transforming my Dulcinea, but they transformed and changed her into a shape as mean and ill-favoured as that of the village girl yonder, and at the same time they robbed her of that which is such a peculiar property of ladies of distinction, that is to say, the sweet fragrance that comes of being always among perfumes and flowers. For I must tell thee, Sancho, that when I approached to put Dulcinea upon her hackney, as thou sayest it was, though to me it appeared a she-ass, she gave me a whiff of raw garlic that made my head reel, and poisoned my very heart." "Oh, scum of the earth!" cried Sancho at this. "O miserable, spiteful enchanters! Oh, that I could see you all strung by the gills like sardines on a twig! Ye know a great deal, you can do a great deal, and you do a great deal more. It ought to have been enough for you, ye scoundrels, to have changed the pearls of my lady's eyes into oak galls, and her hair of purest gold into the bristles of a red ox's tail, and in short, all her features from fair to foul, without meddling with her smell, for by that we might somehow have found out what was hidden underneath that ugly rind, though, to tell the truth, I never perceived her ugliness, but only her beauty, which was raised to the highest pitch of perfection by a mole she had on her right lip, like a moustache, with 7 or 8 red hairs like threads of gold, and more than a palm long."
"From the correspondence which exists between those of the face and those of the body," said Don Quixote, "Dulcinea must have another mole resembling that on the thick of the thigh on that side on which she has the one on her face, but hairs of the length thou hast mentioned are very long for moles."
"Well, all I can say is, there they were as plain as could be," replied Sancho. "I believe it, my friend," returned Don Quixote, "for nature bestowed nothing on Dulcinea that was not perfect and well finished, and so if she had 100 moles like the one thou hast described, in her they would not be moles but moons and shining stars. But tell me, Sancho, that which seemed to me to be a pack saddle as thou wert fixing it, was it a flat saddle or a side saddle?" "It was neither," replied Sancho, "but a jinete saddle, with a field covering worth half a kingdom, so rich is it." "And that I could not see all this, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Once more I say, and will say 1,000 times, I am the most unfortunate of men."
Sancho the rogue had enough to do to hide his laughter at hearing the simplicity of the master he had so nicely befooled. At length, after a good deal more conversation had passed between them, they remounted their beasts and followed the road to Saragossa, which they expected to reach in time to take part in a certain grand festival which is held every year in that illustrious city. But before they got there, things happened to them, so many, so important, and so strange, that they deserve to be recorded and read, as will be seen farther on. Chapter 11. Of the strange adventure which the valiant Don Quixote had with the car or cart of the Cortes of Death. Dejected beyond measure did Don Quixote pursue his journey, turning over in his mind the cruel trick the enchanters had played him in changing his lady Dulcinea into the vile shape of the village lass, nor could he think of any way of restoring her to her original form, and these reflections so absorbed him that, without being aware of it, he let go Rocinante's bridle, and he, perceiving the liberty that was granted him, stopped at every step to crop the fresh grass with which the plain abounded. Sancho recalled him from his reverie. "Melancholy, señor," said he, "was made not for beasts, but for men. But if men give way to it overmuch, they turn to beasts. Control yourself, your worship. Be yourself again. Gather up Rocinante's reins. Cheer up, rouse yourself, and show that gallant spirit that knights errant ought to have. What the devil is this? What weakness is this? Are we here or in France? The devil fly away with all the Dulcineas in the world, for the well-being of a single knight errant is of more consequence than all the enchantments and transformations on earth."
"Hush, Sancho," said Don Quixote in a weak and faint voice. "Hush, and utter no blasphemies against that enchanted lady, for I alone am to blame for her misfortune and hard fate. Her calamity has come of the hatred the wicked bear me."
"So say I," returned Sancho. "His heart rend in twain, I trow, who saw her once to see her now."
"Thou mayest well say that, Sancho," replied Don Quixote, as thou sawest her in the full perfection of her beauty, for the enchantment does not go so far as to pervert thy vision or hide her loveliness from thee. Against me alone and against my eyes is the strength of its venom directed. Nevertheless, there is one thing which has occurred to me, and that is that thou didst ill describe her beauty to me, for, as well as I recollect, thou saidst that her eyes were pearls. But eyes that are like pearls are rather the eyes of a sea-bream than of a lady, and I am persuaded that Dulcinea's must be green emeralds, full and soft, with 2 rainbows for eyebrows. Take away those pearls from her eyes, and transfer them to her teeth, for, beyond a doubt, Sancho, thou hast taken the one for the other, the eyes for the teeth."
"Very likely," said Sancho, "for her beauty bewildered me as much as her ugliness did your worship. But let us leave it all to God, who alone knows what is to happen in this vale of tears, in this evil world of ours, where there is hardly a thing to be found without some mixture of wickedness, roguery, and rascality. But one thing, señor, troubles me more than all the rest, and that is thinking what is to be done when your worship conquers some giant or some other knight, and orders him to go and present himself before the beauty of the lady Dulcinea. Where is this poor giant, or this poor wretch of a vanquished knight, to find her? I think I can see them wandering all over El Toboso, looking like noddies, and asking for my lady Dulcinea, and even if they meet her in the middle of the street, they won't know her any more than they would my father."
"Perhaps, Sancho," returned Don Quixote, "the enchantment does not go so far as to deprive conquered and presented giants and knights of the power of recognizing Dulcinea. We will try by experiment with 1 or 2 of the first I vanquish, and send to her whether they see her or not, by commanding them to return and give me an account of what happened to them in this respect."
"I declare, I think what your worship has proposed is excellent," said Sancho, "and that by this plan we shall find out what we want to know. And if it be that it is only from your worship she is hidden, the misfortune will be more yours than hers. But so long as the lady Dulcinea is well and happy, we on our part will make the best of it, and get on as well as we can, seeking our adventures, and leaving time to take his own course, for he is the best physician for these and greater ailments."
Don Quixote was about to reply to Sancho Panza, but he was prevented by a cart crossing the road, full of the most diverse and strange personages and figures that could be imagined. He who led the mules and acted as carter was a hideous demon. The cart was open to the sky without a tilt or cane roof, and the first figure that presented itself to Don Quixote's eyes was that of Death itself with a human face. Next to it was an angel with large painted wings, and at one side an emperor with a crown, to all appearance of gold, on his head. At the feet of Death was the god called Cupid, without his bandage, but with his bow, quiver, and arrows. There was also a knight in full armour, except that he had no morion or helmet, but only a hat decked with plumes of divers colours, and along with these there were others with a variety of costumes and faces. All this, unexpectedly encountered, took Don Quixote somewhat aback, and struck terror into the heart of Sancho. But the next instant Don Quixote was glad of it, believing that some new perilous adventure was presenting itself to him, and under this impression, and with a spirit prepared to face any danger, he planted himself in front of the cart, and in a loud and menacing tone exclaimed, "Carter, or coachman, or devil, or whatever thou art, tell me at once who thou art, whether thou art going, and who these folks are that thou carriest in thy wagon, which looks more like Charon's boat than an ordinary cart." To which the devil, stopping the cart, answered quietly, "Señor, we are players of Angulo el Malo's company. We have been acting the play of the Cortes of Death this morning, which is the octave of Corpus Christi, in a village behind that hill, and we have to act it this afternoon in that village which you can see from this.
and as it is so near, and to save the trouble of undressing and dressing again, we go in the costumes in which we perform. That lad there appears as a Death, that other as an angel. That woman, the manager's wife, plays the queen, this one the soldier, that the emperor, and I the devil. And I am one of the principal characters of the play, for in this company I take the leading parts. If you want to know anything more about us, ask me, and I will answer with the utmost exactitude, for as I am a devil, and I am up to everything." "By faith of a knight-errant," replied Don Quixote, "when I saw this cart I fancied some great adventure was presenting itself to me, but I declare one must touch with the hand what appears to the eye, if illusions are to be avoided. God speed you, good people, keep your festival, and remember, if you demand of me aught wherein I can render you a service, I will do it gladly and willingly, for from a child I was fond of the play, and in my youth a keen lover of the actor's art."
While they were talking, fate so willed it that one of the company in a mummer's dress, with a great number of bells, and armed with 3 blown ox bladders at the end of a stick, joined them, and this Merry Andrew, approaching Don Quixote, began flourishing his stick and banging the ground with the bladders and cutting capers with great jingling of the bells, which untoward apparition so startled Rocinante that, in spite of Don Quixote's efforts to hold him in, taking the bit between his teeth, he set off across the plain with greater speed than the bones of his anatomy ever gave any promise of. Sancho, who thought his master was in danger of being thrown, jumped off Dapple and ran in all haste to help him, but by the time he reached him he was already on the ground, and beside him was Rocinante, who had come down with his master, the usual end and upshot of Rocinante's vivacity and high spirits. But the moment Sancho quitted his beast to go and help Don Quixote, the dancing devil with the bladders jumped up on Dapple, and, beating him with them, more by the fright and the noise than by the pain of the blows, made him fly across the fields toward the village where they were going to hold their festival. Sancho witnessed Dapple's career and his master's fall, and did not know which of the 2 cases of need he should attend to first. But in the end, like a good squire and good servant, he let his love for his master prevail over his affection for his ass, though every time he saw the bladders rise in the air and come down on the hindquarters of his Dapple, he felt the pains and terrors of death, and he would have rather had the blows fall on the apples of his own eyes than on the last hair of his ass's tail. In this trouble and perplexity he came to where Don Quixote lay in a far sorrier plight than he liked, and having helped him to mount Rocinante, he said to him, "Señor, the devil has carried off my Dapple."
"What devil?" asked Don Quixote.
"The one with the bladders," said Sancho.
"Then I will recover him," said Don Quixote, "even if he be shut up with him in the deepest and darkest dungeons of hell. Follow me, Sancho, for the cart goes slowly, and with the mules of it I will make good the loss of Dapple."
"You need not take the trouble, señor," said Sancho. "Keep cool, for as I now see, the devil has let Dapple go, and he is coming back to his old quarters." And so it turned out, for having come down with Dapple, in imitation of Don Quixote and Rocinante, the devil made off on foot to the town, and the ass came back to his master.
"For all that," said Don Quixote, "it will be well to visit the discourtesy of that devil upon some of those in the cart, even if it were the emperor himself."
"Don't think of it, your worship," returned Sancho. "Take my advice, and never meddle with actors, for they are a favored class. I myself have known an actor taken up for 2 murders and yet come off scot-free. Remember that, as they are merry folk who give pleasure, everyone favors and protects them, and helps and makes much of them, above all when they are those of the royal companies and under patent, all or most of whom in dress and appearance look like princes."
"Still, for all that," said Don Quixote, "the player devil must not go off boasting, even if the whole human race favors him."
So saying, he made for the cart, which was now very near the town, shouting out as he went. Stay! Halt, ye merry jovial crew! I want to teach you how to treat asses and animals that serve the squires of knights errant for steeds." So loud were the shouts of Don Quixote that those in the cart heard and understood them, and, guessing by the words what the speaker's intention was, Death in an instant jumped out of the cart, and the emperor, the devil carter, and the angel after him. Nor did the queen or the god Cupid stay behind, and all armed themselves with stones and formed in line, prepared to receive Don Quixote on the points of their pebbles. Don Quixote, when he saw them drawn up in such a gallant array, with uplifted arms ready for a mighty discharge of stones, checked Rocinante, and began to consider in what way he could attack them with the least danger to himself. As he halted, Sancho came up, and seeing him disposed to attack this well-ordered squadron, said to him,
"It would be the height of madness to attempt such an enterprise. Remember, señor, that against sops from the brook, and plenty of them, there is no defensive armor in the world, except to stow oneself away under a brass bell, and besides, one should remember that it is rashness and not valor for a single man to attack an army that has death in it, and where emperors fight in person, with angels, good and bad, to help them. And if this reflection will not make you keep quiet, perhaps it will to know for certain that among all these, though they look like kings, princes, and emperors, there is not a single knight errant."
"Now indeed thou hast hit the point, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "which may and should turn me from the resolution I had already formed. I cannot and must not draw sword, as I have many a time before told thee, against anyone who is not a dubbed knight. It is for thee, Sancho, if thou wilt, to take vengeance for the wrong done to thy dapple, and I will help thee from here by shouts and salutary counsels." "There is no occasion to take vengeance on anyone, señor," replied Sancho, "for it is not the part of good Christians to revenge wrongs, and besides, I will arrange it with my ass to leave his grievance to my good will and pleasure, and that is to live in peace as long as heaven grants me life." "Well," said Don Quixote, "if that be thy determination, good Sancho, sensible Sancho, Christian Sancho, honest Sancho, let us leave these phantoms alone, and turn to the pursuit of better and worthier adventures; for from what I see of this country, we cannot fail to find plenty of marvellous ones in it." He at once wheeled about. Sancho ran to take possession of his dapple, Death and his flying squadron returned to their cart and pursued their journey, and thus the dread adventure of the cart of Death ended happily, thanks to the advice Sancho gave his master, who had, the following day, a fresh adventure of no less thrilling interest than the last, with an enamored knight errant. End of chapter 11. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois.
Chapters 12 and 13 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ricardo. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 12. Of the strange adventure which befell the valiant Don Quixote with the bold Knight of the Mirrors. The night succeeding the day of the encounter with Death, Don Quixote and his squire passed under some tall shady trees, and Don Quixote at Sancho's persuasion ate a little from the store carried by Dapple, and over their supper Sancho said to his master, "Señor, what a fool I should have looked if I had chosen for my reward the spoils of the first adventure your worship achieved instead of the foals of the 3 mares. After all, a sparrow in the hand is better than a vulture in the wing." "At the same time, Sancho," replied Don Quixote, "if thou hadst let me attack them as I wanted, at the very least the emperor's gold crown and Cupid's painted wings would have fallen to thee as spoils, for I should have taken them by force and given them into thy hands. The sceptres and crowns of those play-actor emperors, said Sancho, were never yet pure gold, but only brass foil or tin. That is true, said Don Quixote, for it would not be right that the accessories of the drama should be real, instead of being mere fictions and semblances like the drama itself, towards which, Sancho, and as a necessary consequence towards those who represent and produce it, I would that thou wert favourably disposed, for they are all instruments of great good to the state, placing before us at every step a mirror in which we may see vividly displayed what goes on in human life. Nor is there any similitude that shows us more faithfully what we are and ought to be than the play and the players. Come, tell me, hast thou not seen a play acted in which kings, emperors, pontiffs, knights, ladies, and divers other personages were introduced? One plays the villain, another the knave, this one the merchant, that the soldier, one the sharp-witted fool, another the foolish lover. And when the play is over, and they have put off the dresses they wore in it, all the actors become equal. Yes, I have seen that, said Sancho. Well, then, said Don Quixote, the same thing happens in the comedy and life of this world, where some play emperors, others popes, and, in short, all the characters that can be brought into a play. But when it is over, that is to say, when life ends, death stripes them all of the garments that distinguish one from another, and all are equal in the grave. A fine comparison, said Sancho, though not so new, but that I have heard it many and many a time, as well as that other one of the game of chess, how, so long as the game lasts, each piece has its own particular office, and when the game is finished, they are all mixed, jumbled up and shaken together, and stowed away in the bag, which is much like ending life in the grave. Thou art growing less doltish and more shrewd every day, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Ay, said Sancho, it must be that some of your worship's shrewdness sticks to me. Land that of itself is barren and dry will come to yield good fruit if you dung it and till it. What I mean is that your worship's conversation has been the dung that has fallen on the barren soil of my dry wit, and the time I have been in your service and society has been the tillage, and with the help of this I hope to yield fruit in abundance that will not fall away or slide from those paths of good breeding that your worship has made in my parched understanding. Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's affected phraseology, and perceived that what he said about his improvement was true, for now and then he spoke in a way that surprised him, though always or mostly when Sancho tried to talk fine and attempted polite language, he wound up by toppling over from the summit of his simplicity into the abyss of his ignorance, and where he showed his culture and his memory to the greatest advantage was in dragging in proverbs, no matter whether they had any bearing or not upon the subject in hand, as may have been seen already and will be noticed in the course of this history. In conversation of this kind they passed a good part of the night, but Sancho felt a desire to let down the curtains on his eyes, as he used to say when he wanted to go to sleep, and strapping Dapple he left him at liberty to graze his fill. He did not remove Rocinante's saddle, as his master's express orders were, that so long as they were in the field or not sleeping under a roof, Rocinante was not to be stripped, the ancient usage established and observed by knights-errant being to take off the bridle and hang it on the saddle-bow, but to remove the saddle from the horse never. Sancho acted accordingly, and gave him the same liberty he had given Dapple, between whom and Rocinante there was a friendship so unequalled and so strong that it is handed down by tradition from father to son, that the author of this veracious history devoted some special chapters to it, which, in order to preserve the propriety and decorum due to a history so heroic, he did not insert therein, although at times he forgets this resolution of his, and describes how eagerly the two beasts would scratch one another when they were together, and how, when they were tired or full, Rocinante would lay his neck across Dapple's, stretching half a yard or more on the other side, and the pair would stand thus, gazing thoughtfully on the ground, for 3 days, or at least so long as they were left alone, or hunger did not drive them to go and look for food. I may add that they say the author left it on record that he likened their friendship to that of Nisus and Euryalus, and Pylades and Orestes, and, if that be so, it may be perceived, to the admiration of mankind, how firm the friendship must have been between these two peaceful animals, shaming men who preserve friendships with one another so badly. This was why it was said, for friend no longer is their friend. The reeds turn lances now, and someone else has sung, friend to friend the bug, etc. And let no one fancy that the author was at all astray when he compared the friendship of these animals to that of men, for men have received many lessons from beasts, and learned many important things, as, for example, the clyster from the stork, vomit and gratitude from the dog, watchfulness from the crane, foresight from the ant, modesty from the elephant, and loyalty from the horse. Sancho at last fell asleep at the foot of a cork tree, while Don Quixote dozed at that of a sturdy oak. But a short time only had elapsed when a noise he heard behind him awoke him, and rising up, startled. He listened and looked in the direction the noise came from, and perceived 2 men on horseback, one of whom, letting himself drop from the saddle, said to the other, "Dismount, my friend, and take the bridles off the horses, for, so far as I can see, this place will furnish grass for them, and the solitude and silence my love-sick thoughts need of." As he said this, he stretched himself upon the ground, and, as he flung himself down, the armour in which he was clad rattled, whereby Don Quixote perceived that he must be a knight-errant. And going over to Sancho, who was asleep, he shook him by the arm, and, with no small difficulty, brought him back to his senses, and said in a low voice to him, "Brother Sancho, we have got an adventure." "God send us a good one," said Sancho. "And where may her ladyship the adventure be?" "Where, Sancho?" replied Don Quixote. "Turn thine eyes and look, and thou wilt see stretched there a knight-errant, who, it strikes me, is not over and above happy, for I saw him flying himself off his horse, and throw himself on the ground with a certain air of dejection, and his armour rattled as he fell." "Well," said Sancho, "how does your worship make out that to be an adventure?" "I do not mean to say," returned Don Quixote, "that it is a complete adventure, but that it is the beginning of one, for it is in this way adventures begin. But listen, for it seems he is tuning a lute or guitar, and from the way he is spitting and clearing his chest, he must be getting ready to sing something." "Faith, you are right," said Sancho, "and no doubt he is some enamoured knight." "There is no knight-errant that is not," said Don Quixote, "but let us listen to him, for if he sings, by that thread we shall extract the ball of his thoughts, because out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." Sancho was about to reply to his master, but the Knight of the Grove's voice, which was neither very bad nor very good, stopped him, and listening attentively, the pair heard him sing this sonnet: "Your pleasure, prithee, lady mine, unfold. Declare the terms that I am to obey. My will to yours submissively I mould, and from your law my feet shall never stray. Would you I die to silent grief a prey? Then count me even now as dead and cold. Would you I tell my woes in some new way? Then shall my tale by love itself be told. The unison of opposites to prove, of the soft wax and diamond hard am I, but still, obedient to the laws of love, here, hard or soft, I offer you my breast. Whate'er you grave or stamp thereon shall rest indelible for all eternity. With an "Ah me" that seemed to be drawn from the inmost recesses of his heart, the Knight of the Grove brought his lay to an end, and shortly afterwards exclaimed in a melancholy and piteous voice, "O fairest and most ungrateful woman on earth, what, can it be, most serene Casildea de Vandalia, that thou wilt suffer this thy captive knight to waste away and perish in ceaseless wanderings and rude and arduous toils? It is not enough that I have compelled all the knights of Navarre, all the Leonese, all the Tartesians, all the Castellans, and finally all the knights of La Mancha to confess thee the most beautiful in the world." "Not so," said Don Quixote at this, "for I am of La Mancha, and I have never confessed anything of the sort, nor could I, nor should I confess a thing so much to the prejudice of my lady's beauty. Thou seest how this knight is raving, Sancho. But let us listen. Perhaps he will tell us more about himself." "That he will," returned Sancho, "for he seems in a mood to bewail himself for a month at a stretch." But this was not the case, for the Knight of the Grove, hearing voices near him, instead of continuing his lamentation, stood up and exclaimed in a distinct but courteous tone, "Who goes there? What are you? Do you belong to the number of the happy or of the miserable?" "Of the miserable," answered Don Quixote. "Then come to me," said he of the Grove, "and rest assured that it is to woe itself and affliction itself you come." Don Quixote, finding himself answered in such a soft and courteous manner, went over to him, and so did Sancho. The doleful knight took Don Quixote by the arm, saying, "Sit down here, Sir Knight, for that you are one, and of those that profess knight-erranty, it is to me a sufficient proof to have found you in this place, where solitude and night, the natural couch and proper retreat of knights-errant, keep you company." To which Don made answer, "A knight I am of the profession you mention, and though sorrows, misfortunes, and calamities have made my heart their abode, the compassion I feel for the misfortunes of others has not been thereby banished from it. From what you have just now sung, I gather that yours spring from love, I mean from the love you bear that fair ingrate you named in your lament." In the meantime they had seated themselves together on the hard ground, peaceably and sociably, just if, as soon as day broke, they were not going to break one another's heads. "Are you, Sir Knight, in love, perchance?" asked he of the Grove of Don Quixote. "By mischance I am," replied Don Quixote, "though the ills arising from well-bestowed affections should be esteemed favours rather than misfortunes." "That is true," returned he of the Grove, "if scorn did not unsettle our reason and understanding, for if it be excessive it looks like revenge." "I was never scorned by my lady," said Don Quixote. "Certainly not," said Sancho, who stood close by, "for my lady is as a lamb and softer than a roll of butter." "Is this your squire?" asked he of the Grove. "He is," said Don Quixote. "I never yet saw a squire," said he of the Grove, "who ventured to speak when his master was speaking. At least there is mine, who is as big as his father, and it cannot be proved that he has never opened his lips when I am speaking." "By my faith, then," said Sancho, "I have spoken, and am fit to speak, in the presence of one as much, or even... but never mind, it only makes it worse to stir it." The squire of the grove took Sancho by the arm, saying to him, "Let us two go where we can talk in squire style, as much as we please, and leave these gentlemen our masters to fight it out over the story of their loves, and, depend upon it, daybreak will find them at it, without having made an end of it." "So be it by all means," said Sancho, "and I will tell your worship who I am, that you may see whether I am to be reckoned among the number of the most talkative squires." With this the two squires withdrew to one side, and between them there passed a conversation as droll as that which passed between their masters was serious. Chapter 13, in which is continued the adventure of the Knight of the Grove, together with the sensible, original, and tranquil colloquy that passed between the two squires. The knights and the squires made two parties, these telling the story of their lives, the others the story of their loves. But the history relates first of all the conversation of the servants, and afterwards takes up that of the masters, and it says that, withdrawing a little from the others, he of the grove said to Sancho, "A hard life it is we lead and live, señor, we that are squires to knights errant. Verily, we eat our bread in the sweat of our faces, which is one of the curses God laid on our first parents. It may be said too," added Sancho, "that we eat it in the chill of our bodies, for who gets more heat and cold than the miserable squires of knight-errantry? Even so, it would not be so bad if we had something to eat, for woes are lighter if there's bread, but sometimes we go a day or two without breaking our fast except with the wind that blows." "All that," said he of the grove, "may be endured and put up with when we have hopes of reward, for, unless the knight-errant he serves is excessively unlucky, after a few turns the squire will at least find himself rewarded with a fine government of some island or some fair county." "I," said Sancho, "have already told my master that I shall be content with the government of some island, and he is so noble and generous that he has promised it to me ever so many times." "I," said he of the grove, "shall be satisfied with a canonry for my services, and my master has already assigned me one." "Your master," said Sancho, "no doubt is a knight in the church line, and can bestow rewards of that sort on his good squire, but mine is only a layman, though I remember some clever, but to my mind designing people strove to persuade him to try and become an archbishop. He, however, would not be anything but an emperor. But I was trembling all the time lest he should take a fancy to go into the church, not finding myself fit to hold office in it, for I may tell you, though I seem a man, I am no better than a beast for the church." "Well, then, you are wrong there," said he of the grove, "for those island governments are not all satisfactory. Some are awkward, some are poor, some are dull, and in short, the highest and choicest brings with it a heavy burden of cares and troubles, which the unhappy wight to whose lot it has fallen bears upon his shoulders. Far better would it be for us, who have adopted this accursed service, to go back to our own houses, and there employ ourselves in pleasanter occupations, in hunting or fishing, for instance. For what squire in the world is there so poor as not to have a hack and a couple of greyhounds, and a fishing rod to amuse himself with in his own village. "I am not in want of any of those things," said Sancho. "To be sure I have no hack, but I have an ass that is worth my master's horse twice over. God send me a bad Easter, and that the next one I am to see, if I would swap, even if I got 4 bushels of barley to boot. You will laugh at the value I put on my dapple, for dapple is the colour of my beast. As to greyhounds, I can't want for them, for there are enough and to spare in my town, and moreover there is more pleasure in sport when it is at other people's expense. In truth and earnest, Sir Squire, said he of the Grove, I have made up my mind and determined to have done with these drunken vagaries of these nights, and go back to my village and bring up my children, for I have 3, like 3 oriental pearls. I have 2, said Sancho, that might be presented before the Pope himself, especially a girl, whom I am breeding up for a countess, please God, though in spite of her mother. And how old is this lady that is being bred up for countess? Asked he of the Grove. 15, a couple of years more or less, answered Sancho, but she is as tall as a lance, and as fresh as an April morning, and as strong as a porter. Those are gifts to fit her to be not only a countess, but a nymph in the greenwood, said he of the Grove. Whoreson strumpet, what a pith the rogue must have! To which Sancho made answer somewhat sulkily, She is not strumpet, nor was her mother, nor will either of them be, please God, while I live. Speak more civilly, for one bred up among knights errant, who are courtesy itself, your words don't seem to me to be very becoming. Oh, how little you know about compliments, Sir Squire, returned he of the Grove. What, don't you know that when a horseman delivers a good lance thrust at the bull in the plaza, or when anyone does anything very well, the people are wont to say, "Ha, whoreson rip, how well he has done it," and that what seems to be abuse in the expression is high praise? Disown sons and daughters, señor, who don't do what deserves that compliments of this sort should be paid to their parents. I do disown them, replied Sancho, and in this way and by the same reasoning. You might call me and my children and my wife all the strumpets in the world, for all they do and say is of a kind that in the highest degree deserves the same praise, and to see them again I pray God to deliver me from mortal sin, or, what comes to the same thing, to deliver me from this perilous calling of squire, into which I have fallen a second time, decayed and beguiled by a purse with 100 ducats that I found one day in the heart of the Sierra Morena, and the devil is always putting a bag full of doubloons before my eyes, here, there, everywhere, until I fancy at every stop I am putting my hand on it, and hugging it, and carrying it home with me, and making investments, and getting interest, and living like a prince. And so long as I think of this, I make light of all the hardship I endure with this simpleton of a master of mine, who, I well know, is more of a madman than a knight. That's why they say that covetousness bursts the bag, said he of the Grove. But if you come to talk of that sort, there is not a greater one in the world than my master, for he is one of those of whom they say, the cares of others kill the ass. For in order that another knight may recover the senses he has lost, he makes a madman of himself, and goes looking for what, when found, may, for all I know, fly in his own face. And is he in love, perchance? Asked Sancho. He is, said he of the Grove, with one Casildea de Vandalia, the rawest and best roasted lady the whole world could produce, but that rawness is not the only food he limps on, for he has greater schemes rumbling in his bowels, as will be seen before many hours are over. There's no road so smooth but it has some hole or hindrance in it, said Sancho. In other houses they cook beans, but in mine it's by the potful. Madness will have more followers and hangers-on than sound sense, but if there be any truth in the common saying that to have companions in trouble gives some relief, I may take consolation from you, inasmuch as you serve a master as crazy as my own. Crazy, but valiant, replied he of the Grove, and more roguish than crazy or valiant. Mine is not that, said Sancho. I mean he has nothing of the rogue in him. On the contrary, he has the soul of a pitcher. He has no thought of doing harm to any one, only good to all, nor has he any malice whatever in him. A child might persuade him that it is night at noonday, and for this simplicity I love him as the core of my heart, and I can't bring myself to leave him, let him do ever such foolish things. For all that, brother and señor, said he of the Grove, if the blind lead the blind, both are in danger of falling into the pit. It is better for us to beat a quiet retreat and get back to our own quarters, for those who seek adventures don't always find good ones. Sancho kept spitting from time to time, and his spittle seemed somewhat roupy and dry, observing which, the compassionate squire of the Grove said, It seems to me that with all this talk of ours, our tongues are sticking to the roofs of our mouths, but I have a pretty good loosener hanging from the saddle-bow of my horse. And getting up, he came back the next minute with a large bottle of wine and a pasty half a yard across, and this is no exaggeration, for it was made of a house rabbit so big that Sancho, as he handled it, took it to be made of a goat, not to say a kid, and looking at it, he said, And do you carry this with you, señor? Why, what are you thinking about? Said the other. Do you take me for some paltry squire? I carry a better larder on my horse's croup than a general takes with him when he goes on a march. Sancho ate without requiring to be pressed, and in the dark bolted mouthfuls like the knots of a tether. And said he, You are a proper trusty squire, one of the right sort, sumptuous and grand, as this banquet shows, which, if it has not come here by magic art, at any rate has the look of it. Not like me, unlucky beggar, that have nothing more in my alforjas than a scrap of cheese, so hard that one might brain a giant with it, and to keep it company, a few dozen carobs and as many more filberts and walnuts, thanks to the austerity of my master, and the idea he has and the rule he follows, that knights-errant must not live or sustain themselves on anything except dried fruits and the herbs of the field. By my faith, brother, said he of the Grove, my stomach is not made for thistles, or wild pears, or roots of the woods. Let our masters do as they like with their chivalry notions and laws, and eat what those enjoin. I carry my prog-basket and this bottle hanging on the saddle-bow, whatever they may say, and it is such an object of worship with me, and I love it so, that there is hardly a moment but I am kissing and embracing it over and over again. And so saying, he thrust it into Sancho's hands, who, raising it aloft, pointed to his mouth, gazed at the stars for a quarter of an hour, and when he had done drinking, let his head fall on one side, and giving a deep sigh, exclaimed, Ah, whoreson rogue, how catholic it is! There you see, said he of the Grove, hearing Sancho's exclamation, how you have called this wine whoreson by way of praise. Well, said Sancho, I own it, and I grant it is no dishonour to call any one whoreson when it is to be understood as a praise. But tell me, señor, by what you love best, is this Ciudad Real wine? O rare wine taster, said he of the Grove, Nowhere else indeed does it come from, and it has some years' age too." "Leave me alone for that," said Sancho. "Never fear but I'll hit upon the place it came from somehow. What would you say, Sir Squire, to my having such a great natural instinct in judging wines that you have only to let me smell one, and I can tell positively its country, its kind, its flavour and soundness, the changes it will undergo, and everything that appertains to a wine? But it is no wonder, for I have had in my family on my father's side the two best wine tasters that have been known in La Mancha for many a long year, and to prove it I'll tell you now a thing that happened them. They gave the two of them some wine out of a cask to try, asking their opinion as to the condition, quality, goodness or badness of the wine. One of them tried it with the tip of his tongue, the other did no more than bring it to his nose. The first said the wine had a flavour of iron, the second said it had a stronger flavour of cordovan. The owner said the cask was clean, and that nothing had been added to the wine from which it could have got a flavour of either iron or leather. Nevertheless, these two great wine tasters held to what they had said. Time went by, the wine was sold, and when they came to clean out the cask, they found in it a small key hanging to a thong of cordovan. See now if one who comes of the same stock has not a right to give his opinion in such like cases. Therefore I say, said he of the Grove, let us give up going in quest of adventures, and as we have loaves, let us not go looking for cakes, but return to our cribs, for God will find us there, if it be his will. Until my master reaches Saragossa, said Sancho, I'll remain in his service. After that we'll see. The end of it was that the two squires talked so much and drank so much that sleep had to tie their tongues and moderate their thirst, for to quench it was impossible, and so the pair of them fell asleep, clinging to the now nearly empty bota, and with the half-chewed morsels in their mouths. And there we will leave them for the present, to relate what passed between the Knight of the Grove and him of the Rueful Countenance. End of chapters 12 and 13.
Of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Armsby. Chapter 14, wherein is continued the adventure of the Knight of the Grove. Among the things that passed between Don Quixote and the Knight of the Wood, the history tells us that he of the Grove said to Don Quixote, "In fine, Sir Knight, I would have you know that my destiny, or more properly speaking, my choice, led me to fall in love with the peerless Casildea de Vandalia. I call her peerless because she has no peer, whether it be in bodily stature or in the supremacy of rank and beauty. This same Casildea, then, that I speak of, requited my honourable passion and gentle aspirations by compelling me, as his stepmother did Hercules, to engage in many perils of various sorts, at the end of each promising me that with the end of the next the object of my hopes should be attained. But my labours have gone on increasing link by link until they are past counting, nor do I know what will be the last one that is to be the beginning of the accomplishment of my cast desires. On one occasion she bade me go and challenge the famous giantess of Seville, La Giralda by name, who is as mighty and strong as if made of brass, and though never stirring from one spot, is the most relentless and changeable woman in the world. I came, I saw, I conquered, and I made her stay quiet and behave herself, for nothing but north winds blew for more than a week. Another time I was ordered to lift those ancient stones, the mighty bulls of Guisando, an enterprise that might more fitly be entrusted to porters than to knights. Again she bade me fling myself into the cavern of Cabra, an unparalleled and awful peril, and bring her a minute account of all that is concealed in those gloomy depths. I stopped the motion of the Giralda. I lifted the bulls of Guisando. I flung myself into the cavern and brought to light the secrets of its abyss. And my hopes are as dead can be, and her scorn and her commands as lively as ever. To be brief, last of all, she has commanded me to go through all the provinces of Spain, and compel all the knights errant wandering therein to confess that she surpasses all women alive today in beauty, and that I am the most valiant and the most deeply enamored knight on earth. In support of which claim I have already travelled over the greater part of Spain, and have vanquished several knights who have dared to contradict me. But what I most plume and pride myself upon is having vanquished in single combat that so famous knight Don Quixote de la Mancha, and made him confess that my Casildea is more beautiful than his Dulcinea, and in this one victory I hold myself to have conquered all the knights in the world. For this Don Quixote that I speak of has vanquished them all, and I, having vanquished him, his glory, his fame, and his honour have passed, and are now transferred to my person. For the more the vanquished hath of fair renown, the greater glory gilds the victor's crown. Thus the innumerable achievements of the said Don Quixote are now set down to my account, and have become mine. Don Quixote was amazed when he heard the Knight of the Grove, and was at 1,000 times on the point of telling him he lied, and had the lie directly already on the tip of his tongue, but he restrained himself as well as he could, in order to force him to confess the lie with his own lips. So he said to him quietly, "As to what you say, Sir Knight, about having vanquished most of the knights of Spain, or even the whole world, I say nothing, but that you have vanquished Don Quixote of La Mancha I consider doubtful. It may have been some other that resembled him, although there are few like him." "How? Not vanquished?" said he of the Grove. "By the heaven that is above us, I fought Don Quixote and overcame him, and made him yield, and he is a man of tall stature, gaunt features, long lank limbs, with hair turning grey, an aquiline nose rather hooked, and large black drooping moustaches. He does battle under the name of the Countenance, and he has for squire a peasant called Sancho Panza. He presses the loins and rules the reins of a famous steed called Rocinante. And lastly, he has for the mistress of his will a certain Dulcinea del Toboso, once upon a time called Aldonza de Lorenzo, just as I call mine Casildea de Vandalia, because her name is Casilda and she is of Andalusia. If all of these tokens are not enough to vindicate the truth of what I say, here's my sword, that will compel incredulity itself to give credence to it." "Calm yourself, Sir Knight," said Don Quixote, "and give ear to what I am about to say to you. I would have you know that this Don Quixote you speak of is the greatest friend I have in the world, so much that I might say I regard him in the same light as my own person, and from the precise and clear indication that you have given, I cannot but think that he must be the very one that you have vanquished. On the other hand, I see with my eyes and feel with my hands that it is impossible it can have been the same, unless indeed it be that, as he has many enemies who are enchanters, and one in particular who is always persecuting him, some one of these may have taken his shape in order to allow himself to be vanquished, so as to defraud him of the fame that his exalted achievements as a knight have earned and acquired for him throughout the known world. And in confirmation of this, I must tell you too, that it is but 10 hours since the said enchanters, his enemies, transformed the shape and person of the fair Dulcinea del Toboso into a foul and mean village lass. And in the same way they must have transformed Don Quixote. And if all of this does not suffice to convince you of the truth of what I say, here is Don Quixote himself, who will maintain it by arms, on foot, or on horseback, or in any way you please." And so saying, he stood up and laid his hand on his sword, waiting to see what the Knight of the Grove would do, who, in an equally calm voice, said in reply, "Pledges don't distress a good prayer. He who has succeeded in vanquishing you once when transformed, Sir Don Quixote, may fairly hope to subdue you in your own proper shape. But as it is not becoming for knights to perform their feats of arms in the dark, like highwaymen and bullies, let us wait till daylight, that the sun may behold our deeds, and the conditions of our combat shall be that the vanquished shall be at the victor's disposal to do all that he may enjoin, provided that the injunction be such as shall be becoming of a knight." "I am more than satisfied with these conditions and terms," replied Don Quixote. And so saying, they betook themselves to where their squires lay, and found them snoring, and in the same posture they were when sleep fell upon them. They rose them up, and bade them get their horses ready, as at sunrise they were to engage in a bloody and arduous single combat. At which intelligence Sancho was aghast and thunderstruck, trembling for the safety of his master, because of the mighty deeds he had heard the squire of the grove ascribe to his. But without a word the two squires went in quest of their cattle, for by this time the 3 horses and the ass had smelled one another out, and were all together. On the way he of the grove said to Sancho, "You must know, brother, that it is custom with the fighting men of Andalusia, when they are godfathers in any quarrel, not to stand idle with folded arms while their godsons fight. I say so to remind you that while our masters are fighting, we too have to fight and knock one another to shivers." "That custom, sir squire," replied Sancho, "may hold good among those bullies and fighting men you talk of, but certainly not among squires of knights errant. At least, I have never heard my master speak of any custom of the sort, and he knows all the laws of knight errantry by heart. But granting it true that there is an express law that squires are to fight while their masters are fighting, I don't mean to obey it, but to pay the penalty that may be laid on peaceful-minded squires like myself, for I am sure it cannot be more than 2 pounds of wax, and I would rather pay that, for I know it will cost me less than the lint I shall be at the expense of to mend my head, which I look upon as broken and split already. There's another thing that makes it impossible for me to fight, that I have no sword, for I never carried one in my life." "I know a pretty good remedy for that," said he of the grove. "I have here 2 linen bags of the same size. You shall take one, and I the other, and we will fight at back blows with equal arms." "If that is the way, so be it with all my heart," said Sancho, "for that sort of battle will serve to knock the dust off us instead of hurting us." "That will not do," said the other, "for we must put into the bags, to keep the wind from blowing them away, 6 nice smooth pebbles, all of the same weight, and in this way we shall be able to baste one another without doing ourselves any harm or mischief." "Body of my father," said Sancho, "see what marten and sable and pads of cardon cotton he is putting into the bags, that our heads may not be broken and our bones beaten to jelly. But even if they are filled with toss silk, I can tell you, señor, I am not going to fight. Let our masters fight, that's their lookout. And let us drink and live, for time will take care to ease us of our lives, without our going to look for Philips, so that they may be finished off before their proper time comes, and they drop from ripeness." "Still," returned he of the grove, "we must fight, if it only be for half an hour." "By no means," said Sancho. "I am not going to be so discourteous or so ungrateful as to have any quarrel, be it ever so small, with one that I have eaten and drunk with. Besides, who the devil could bring himself to fight in cold blood without anger or provocation?" "I can remedy that entirely," said he of the grove, "and in this way. Before we begin battle, I will come up to your worship fair and softly, and give you 3 or 4 buffets, with which I shall stretch you at my feet and rouse your anger, though it were sleeping sounder than a dormouse." "To match that plan," said Sancho, "I have another there is not a whit behind it. I will take a cudgel, and before your worship comes near enough to waken my anger, I will send yours so sound to sleep with wax that it won't waken unless it be in the other world, where it is known that I am no man to let my face be handled by anyone. Let each look out for the arrow, though the surer way would be to let everyone's anger sleep, for nobody knows the heart of anyone, and a man may come for wool and go back shorn. God gave his blessing to peace and his curse to quarrels. If a hunted cat, surrounded and hard-pressed, turns into a lion, God knows what I, who am a man, may turn into. And so from this time forth I warn you, sir squire, that all the harm and mischief that may come from our quarrel will be put down to your account." "Very good," said he of the grove. "God will send the dawn, and we shall be all right." And now gay plumaged birds of all sorts began to warble in the trees, and with their varied and gladsome notes seemed to welcome and salute the fresh morn that was beginning to show the beauty of her countenance at the gates and balconies of the east, shaking from her locks a profusion of liquid pearls, in which dulcet moisture bathed The plants, too, seemed to shed and shower down a pearly spray. The willows distilled sweet manna. The fountains laughed. The brooks babbled. The woods rejoiced, and the meadows arrayed themselves in all their glory at her coming. But hardly had the light of day made it possible to see and distinguish things, when the first object that presented itself into the eyes of Sancho Panza was the squire of the Grove's nose, which was so big that it almost overshadowed his whole body. It is, in fact, stated that it was of an enormous size, hooked in the middle, covered with warts, and of a mulberry colour like an eggplant. It hung down 2 fingers' length below his mouth, and the size, the colours, the words, and the bend of it made his face so hideous that Sancho, as he looked at him, began to tremble hand and foot like a child in convulsions, and he vowed in his heart to let himself be given 200 buffets sooner than be provoked to fight with that monster. Don Quixote examined his adversary, and found that he already had his helmet on and visor lowered, so that he could not see his face. He observed, however, that he was a sturdily built man, but not very tall in stature. Over his armour he wore a surcoat or cassock of what seemed to be the finest cloth of gold, all bespangled with glittering mirrors like little moons, which gave him an extremely gallant and splendid appearance. Above his helmet fluttered a great quantity of plumes, green, yellow, and white, and his lance, which was leaning against a tree, was very long and stout, and had a steel point more than a palm in length. Don Quixote observed all and took note of all, and from what he saw and observed he concluded that the said knight must be a man of great strength, but he did not for all that give way to fear. Like Sancho Panza, on the contrary, with a composed and dauntless air, he said to the Knight of the Mirrors, "If, Sir Knight, your great eagerness to fight has not banished your courtesy, by it I would entreat you to raise your visor a little, in order that I may see if the comeliness of your countenance corresponds with that of your equipment. Whether you come victorious or vanquished out of this emprise, Sir Knight," replied he of the Mirrors, "you will have more than enough time and leisure to see me. And if now I do not comply with your request, it is because it seems to me that I should do a serious wrong to the fair Casildea de Vandalia in wasting time while I stop to raise my visor before compelling you to confess what you are already aware I maintain." "Well then," said Don Quixote, "while we are mounting you can at least tell me if I am that Don Quixote whom you said you vanquished." "To that we answer," said he of the Mirrors, "that you are as like as the very knight I vanquished as one egg is to another. But as you say enchanters persecute you, I will not venture to say positively whether you are the said person or not." "That," said Don Quixote, "is enough to convince me that you are under a deception. However, entirely to relieve you of it, let our horses be brought, and in less time than it would take you to raise your visor, if God, my lady, and my arms stand me in good stead, I shall see your face, and you shall see that I am not the vanquished Don Quixote you take me to be." With this, cutting short the colloquy, they mounted, and Don Quixote wheeled Rocinante round in order to take a proper distance to charge back upon his adversary, and he of the Mirrors did the same, but Don Quixote had not moved away 20 paces when he heard himself called by the other, and, each returning halfway, he of the Mirrors said to him, "Remember, Sir Knight, that the terms of our combat are, that the vanquished, as said before, shall be at the victor's disposal." "I am aware of it already," said Don Quixote, "provided that what is commanded and imposed upon the vanquished be things that do not transgress the limits of chivalry." "That is understood," replied he of the Mirrors. At this moment the extraordinary nose of the squire presented itself into Don Quixote's view, and he was no less amazed than Sancho at the sight, insomuch that he set him down as a monster of some kind, or a human being of some new species of unearthly breed. Sancho, seeing his master retiring to run his course, did not like to be left alone with the nosy man, fearing that with one flap of that nose on his own, the battle would be all over for him, and he would be left stretched on the ground either by the blow or with fright. So he ran for his master, holding up to Rocinante's stirrup leather, and when it seemed to him time to turn about, he said, "I implore of your worship, señor, before you turn to charge, to help me up into this cork tree, from which I will be able to witness the gallant encounter your worship is going to have with this knight, more to my taste and better than from the ground." "It seems to me rather, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "that thou wouldst mount a scaffold in order to see the bulls without danger." "To tell the truth," returned Sancho, "the monstrous nose of that squire has filled me with fear and terror, and I dare not stay near him." "It is," said Don Quixote, "such a one that, were I not what I am, it would terrify me too. So come, I will help thee up where thou wilt." While Don Quixote waited for Sancho to mount into the cork tree, he of the mirrors took as much ground as he considered requisite, and, supposing Don Quixote to have done the same, without waiting for any sound of trumpet or other signal to direct them, he wheeled his horse, which was not more agile or better looking than Rocinante, and at his top speed, which was an easy trot, he proceeded to charge his enemy. Seeing him, however, engaged in putting Sancho up, he drew rein and halted in mid-career, for which his horse was very grateful, as he was already unable to go. Don Quixote, fancying that his foe was coming down upon him flying, drove his spurs vigorously into Rocinante's lean flanks, and made him scuttle along in such style that the history tells us on this occasion only was he known to make something like running. For on all the others it was a simple trot with him, and with this unparalleled fury he bore down to where he of the mirrors stood, digging his spurs into his horse up to bottoms, without being able to make him stir a finger's length from the spot where he had come to a standstill in his course. At this lucky moment and crisis, Don Quixote came upon his adversary, in trouble with his horse and embarrassed with his lance, which he either could not manage or had not time to lay in rest. Don Quixote, however, paid no attention to these difficulties, and in perfect safety to himself, and without any risk, encountered him of the mirrors with such force that he brought him to the ground, in spite of himself of the haunches of his horse, and with so heavy fall that he lay to all appearance dead, not stirring hand or foot. The instant Sancho saw him fall, he slid down from the cork tree, and made all haste to where his master was, who, dismounting from Rocinante, went and stood over him of the mirrors, and unlacing his helmet to see if he was dead, and to give him air if he should happen to be alive, he saw, who can say what he saw without filling all who hear it with astonishment, wonder, and awe? He saw, the history says, the very countenance, the very face, the very look, the very physiognomy, the very effigy, the very image of the bachelor Samson Carrasco. As soon as he saw it, he called out in loud voice, "Make haste here, Sancho, and behold what thou art to see but not to believe. Quick, my son, and learn what magic can do, and wizards and enchanters are capable of." Sancho came up, and when he saw the countenance of the bachelor Carrasco, he fell to crossing himself 1,000 times, and blessing himself as many more. All this time the prostrate knight showed no signs of life, and Sancho said to Don Quixote, "It is my opinion, señor, that in any case your worship should take and thrust your sword into the mouth of this one here that looks like the bachelor Samson Carrasco. Perhaps in him you will kill one of your enemies, the enchanters." "Thy advice is not bad," said Don Quixote, "for of enemies the fewer the better." And he was drawing his sword to carry into effect Sancho's counsel and suggestion, when the squire of the mirrors came up, now without the nose which had made him so hideous, and cried out in a loud voice, "Mind what you're about, Señor Don Quixote. That is your friend, the bachelor Samson Carrasco, you have at your feet, and I am his squire." "And the nose?" said Sancho, seeing him without the hideous feature he had before. To which he replied, "I have it here in my pocket," and putting his hand into his right pocket, he pulled out a masquerade nose of varnished pasteboard of the make already described. And Sancho, examining him more and more closely, exclaimed aloud in a voice of amazement, "Holy Mary be good to me! Isn't it Tom Cecial, my neighbor and gossip?" "Why, to be sure I am," returned the now unnosed squire. "Tom Cecial I am, gossip and friend Sancho Panza. And I'll tell you presently the means and tricks and falsehoods by which I have been brought here. But in the meantime, beg and entreat of your master not to touch, maltreat, wound, or slay the knight of the mirrors, whom he has at his feet, because beyond all dispute it is the rash and ill-advised bachelor Samson Carrasco, our fellow townsman." At this moment he of the mirrors came to himself, and Don Quixote, perceiving it, held the naked point of his sword over his face, and said to him, You are a dead man, knight, unless you confess that the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso excels your Casildea de Vandalia in beauty, and in addition to this, you must promise, if you should survive this encounter and fall, to go to the city of El Toboso, and present yourself before her on my behalf, that she deal to you accordingly to her good pleasure. And if she leaves you free to do yours, you are in like manner to return and seek me out, for the trail of my mighty deeds will serve you as a guide to lead you to where I may be, and tell me what may have passed between you and her, conditions which, in accordance with what we stipulated before our combat, do not transgress the just limits of knight-errantry. I confess, said the fallen knight, that the dirty, tattered shoe of the lady Dulcinea del Toboso is better than the ill-combed, though clean, beard of Casildea, and I promise to go and return from her presence to yours, and give you a full and particular account of all that you demand of me. You must also confess and believe, added Don Quixote, that the knight you vanquished was not, and could not be, Don Quixote of La Mancha, but someone else in his likeness, just as I confess and believe that you, though you seem to be the bachelor Samson Carrasco, are not so, but someone other resembling him, whom my enemies have put before me in his shape, in order that I may restrain and moderate the vehemence of my wrath, and make a gentle use of the glory of my victory. I confess, hold, and think everything to be as you believe, hold, and think it, the crippled knight. Let me rise and entreat you, if, indeed, the shock of my fall will allow me, for it has left me in a sorry plight enough. Don Quixote helped him to rise, with the assistance of his squire Tom Cecial, from whom Sancho never took his eyes, and to whom he put in questions, the replies to which furnished clear proof that he was really and truly the Tom Cecial he said. But the impression made on Sancho's mind by what his master said about the enchanter's having changed the face of the Knight of the Mirrors into that of the bachelor Samson Carrasco would not permit him to believe what he saw with his eyes. In fine, both master and man remained under the delusion, and, down in the mouth and out of luck, he of the mirrors and his squire parted from Don Quixote and Sancho, he meaning to go and look for some village where he could plaster and strap his ribs. Don Quixote and Sancho resumed their journey to Saragossa, and on it the story leaves them in order that it may tell who the Knight of the Mirrors and his long-nosed squire were. End of chapter 14. Recorded by Antonio in Mocha, Dominican Republic.